Hello and welcome to Module 2 of Week 1. In this module, we're going to talk about the emergence model of communication and more in depth, and talk about the important part of understanding, which is part of that triad in the emergence model, and why that's so effective in program and project communication.
And we're still in week 1 with defining communications, and we're going to be working with module 2, the emergence model of communication. The emergence model of communication was created by a German sociologist, Dr. Nicholas Luhmann, back in 1934, 10 years before Dr. Claude Shannon and Dr. Weaver published their paper on the information transfer model of communication. Now, what was fascinating about Dr. Nicholas Luhmann was he was a prolific author, many books, many report articles, and he did this through the creation of something he called the Zettelkasten, which we can almost consider an early version of the internet. He would take notes, and he had a numbering scheme that would connect notes to each other, and he would arrange them in these kind of shoe boxes, as you can see there in the lower corner. And this is how he would do his research, by connecting ideas and thoughts together. And that's how he came up with the inspiration for his emergence model of communication. That meaning was emerging from contributing pieces of communication to each other. So when you take a look at the emergence model, it actually owes a lot to the Shannon-Weaver model, even though the Shannon-Weaver model came 10 years later. We have the section here called information. That's on the left-hand side. And of course, you remember the sender receiver. We have messages. We encode and we decode. So that's what we do with the information here. We have the signals we want to send. We use utterances, and utterances can be speech. It can be writing. It can be texting. All the different ways we transmit that information. And in between there is the understanding. So when we have information we transmit back and forth through our utterances, we have understanding emerging from that. And unlike the information transmission model, we do a lot of testing to see if understanding actually has occurred, rather than assume if you've received my message as I intended, you must understand me. Let me give you an example of why the emergence model of communication is more appropriate for program and project management communication, in many cases, than the information transfer model. You may have heard the concept of high context and low context cultures. And the idea behind high context and low context cultures is how we communicate and how much meaning is actually communicated through me directly speaking to you, and which is embedded in our cultures. So for example, in high context cultures, most of these are Middle Eastern, Asian cultures, the communication here is to form and develop relationships, and with the communication meaning, some of it's actually embedded in the environment around us. An example I like to give in class is talk about religious ceremonies. You may be at church, synagogue, mosque, and a lot of what you do in the ceremony, of course, you speak, you sing, you communicate with the rest of the group there, but there's also meaning and symbolism in the artifacts in the religious ceremony, the type of songs you pick, various times when you do certain actions. A lot of that is contextual, and there's meaning involved with that. So when we talk about with a high context culture, and this is sometimes what I encounter in my class, I have to kind of pull out a little bit more meaning in the environment, or what the student is not saying, but maybe through body language or paralinguistics. Contrast that with a low context culture where people are pretty upfront and direct in their communication. So an example I like to give, and I hope no one feels insulted by this, but me being from the South, it's kind of a higher context culture, American South, higher context culture than my friends from New York City. My friends from New York City, to me, appear more direct and more open in their communication with me, and I can speak to them and from their spoken communication derive a lot of meaning. Sometimes they say to me, though, I have these American Southern mannerisms or ways I say things. It seems like you have to understand the context in which I say something to get the meaning out of it.
Why is this important in program and project management? Well, let's take a look at something that you probably do as a program or project manager a lot.
You deal with different vendors, you deal with contractors, you deal with all kinds of different parties out there. And in some cases, you may be working with something like a contract. And with contracts, we, of course, with the written contracts, we have a written contract here, and both parties can read it, and we negotiate the terms, and we try to come to an understanding about it. And in a perfect world, whatever I write into the contract, everyone's going to agree to and understand perfectly, and we don't have to worry about contract interpretation. But I'm pretty certain in your experience with contracts, there's a lot about the interpretation piece. And even though we may have multi-pages of contract, there's still a lot of things that we need to kind of work together to understand. So when we talk about contracts here and the understanding, and this is where a lot of litigation occurs, there's different ideas. Some litigation out there talks about the four corners of the contract, that all the understanding is embedded in the contract, within the four corners of the written document. Some courts take a look at the spirit of the contract. What was the spirit of the agreement? We may have said certain things, but there was things that were understood, that were implied, that we can infer from that. So as you can see here, with the information transmission model of communication, I can hand you the contract and you can read it, and if you can tell me back what you've read and it conforms to what I wrote, I can say, well, then you must fully understand the contract. Whereas with the emergence model of communication, that's just the beginning. Now we're talking about, well, you've read it, you understand what I wrote, or you can read back to me what I wrote, but do you actually understand what I wrote? Do you understand the spirit of the contract? Will you abide by that contract? And it's going to have major ramifications, as many of you know, when you're working with a contract in a project.
Hey there, did you enjoy that lesson as much as I did? If you did, go ahead and give us a like. If you want to see another one, go ahead and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, put them below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Moreover, is there somebody in your life who really needs this lesson right now? If so, go ahead and share it with them. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Now, we look forward to seeing you in the next lesson where you can learn even more from the University of Maryland Project Management Center for Excellence. Thanks so much.